So I know I'm the last speech, so I promise not to drone on for too long. Sometimes the most unlikely can become the most extraordinary. At least that was the case for two brothers from Dayton, Ohio, who are now seen as the pioneers of aviation. It was then that, from humble beginnings, these two brothers took a propeller and a fabricated, semi-effective wind tunnel and discovered the science of aerodynamics in the back room of their bike store. It was then that they realized that man could finally achieve its dream of flight. Fast forward 100 years or so, and mankind has begun a new form of aerial discovery that, like the Wright brothers' plane, has spread to the entire world in just a matter of years. This form of technology is carried out through drones. Within just the past 10 years, the prevalence of drone technology has made its way into and become essential in nearly every industry. Due to the extreme importance of drones in everyday life, the federal government has regulated and required licensing for all aspects of commercial piloting as a way to grow their financial power, which has led to hardships for businesses and the nation as a whole. Before I begin, I will define several terms that are needed to understand my argument, as well as describe in detail the drone regulations that are in place today and how they are ineffective. Next, I will describe the differences and some of the misconceptions about recreational versus commercial piloting, as well as some of the most vital uses for drones in today's society, and how these regulations negatively impact these industries. Lastly, I will discuss the effect that removing these regulations would have on personal privacy and our God-given rights protected by the Constitution. Like I said, I would like to spend some time defining a few key terms and provide some background information on my topic and aviation itself. First off, what is a UAS? The International Trade Administration states that the term UAS includes air vehicles and air-associated equipment that do not carry a human operator, but instead are remotely piloted or fly autonomously. UAS are commonly referred to as unmanned aerial systems, UAS, unmanned aerial vehicles, UAV, remotely piloted aircraft systems, RPAS, and drones. A UAS generally consists of 1, an aircraft with no pilot on board, 2, a remote pilot station, 3, a command and control link, and 4, a payload specific to the intended application/operation, which often includes specialized cameras for other sensors that collect near-term analysis. Within the world of aviation, terms such as UAS, UAV, RPAS, and drones can be used interchangeably to mean the same thing. And I will be using these terms when talking about any aircraft being used for an intended purpose without the physical presence of a human on board the aircraft. The only exception for this definition will be an RC or radio-controlled plane. This grouping of recreational planes is not considered a UAS due to their radio wave transmission and the lightweight, inexpensive materials that they are made from. Next, in order to help you understand the growing necessity of UASs, I will briefly be going over just one of the small aspects that UASs play in everyday life. And I will cover these aspects in greater depth later in my speech. Within the world of aviation, one of the most recent techniques is unmanned aerial system photogrammetry, which has quickly become a widespread method for geodata collection in different fields of earth science as well as many other fields. Through new development in UAS technology, UASs have been integrated into almost every scientific field. This has made UASs an important aspect in human life, whether people realize it or not. The applications of UAS can range from inspecting the food that you eat to inspecting the sewers that humans no longer need to. Along with UASs, I would also like to discuss an aspect of the government. As we all know, since the beginning of society, there has always been a justice system, whether it was a king deciding if someone was guilty or the complex constitution that we now have today. While these systems of justice have been in place for centuries, there's one branch of the federal government that has come into being much more recently. This branch is called the Federal Aviation Administration, otherwise known as the FAA, and I will be referring to it often. The FAA deals with everything stemming from aviation, to airline piloting and airspace management, to drone piloting, and even holding owners responsible for breaking a window. It might not seem like it, but compared to the rest of the industries out there, aviation is extremely new and always being improved upon. For example, it was not until the early 1950s that the first jet engine airliner was invented. Similarly, one must understand how the FAA has come into being and the history behind it in order to fully understand how flight has gotten to where it is today. Founded in the early 1930s as the Civil Aeronautics Administration, changing its name to the Federal Aviation Administration in the 1970s, the FAA, under the Department of Transportation, makes rules and enforces them. This means that the FAA has only been in existence for about 90 years. And despite the FAA's best efforts to enforce their laws of aviation, they still fall short in many places. While some of the laws that the FAA puts in place might seem beneficial and help save lives, there have been many regulations that have been put in place instead of creating safety, make Americans' jobs even harder. As a way for the federal government to assume more power and money, the FAA has regulated and required paid licensing and registration of every UAS over the weight of 250 grams. For example, that would be the weight of my speech today. By doing so, they have prevented new jobs and increased labor for workers, all while putting more money in their own pockets. Let's now take a look at the regulations in place that are negatively affecting UAS operations and the industries that are being affected by these regulations. Unfortunately, due to the involvement of the FAA, it is extremely difficult for farmers as well as construction workers to acquire the correct licensing to be able to accomplish their jobs. Within the 2021 FAR-AIM, or Federal Aviation Regulation Aeronautical Information Manual, Americans can find all of the unethical regulations for UAS that act as a hindrance. Part 107 of FAR-AIM, Subpart C, covers the unethical requirements and regulations for UAS remote pilot certification. Part 107 states that a person may not operate a small unmanned aircraft system unless that person has completed one of the following within the previous 24 calendar months: pass an initial aeronautical knowledge test, or have passed a recurrent aeronautical knowledge test. By creating a mandatory thing that must be accomplished before one can take to the skies, the FAA has prevented many from obtaining their license due to the long processes in place. By limiting the freedoms of Americans, the FAA has infringed on public airspace and created a system that does not permit flight to every American, even flight on their own property and for their own income. Similarly, the FAA reserves airspace for the highly intelligent, creating a sense of division among people groups. Because of limitations implemented within the FAA, American citizens must meet certain American standards in order to enjoy the freedoms of piloting. Part 107 of FAR-AIM states, in order to be eligible for remote pilot certification with a small UAS, a person must be able to read, speak, write, and understand the English language. Because America allows legal immigration, many Americans, citizens, do not speak English. This licensing process denies many American citizens the freedom of piloting simply because of the language that they speak, creating an even further cultural divide within America. How does the federal government, through the FAA, have the authority to deny an American citizen a freedom that is protected within the Constitution? Through unethical means, the FAA has regulated the freedoms of all Americans by requiring regulatory licensing in order to place more money in their own pockets. Lastly, through this form of licensing, the FAA has kept American citizens from earning an income through UAS operations. Before being able to earn a living as a UAS operator, a person must have passed an initial aeronautical knowledge test. In order to limit America's freedom of flight, the FAA has designed a knowledge test that one must take before they can legally pilot for a profit. And while this test might just seem like getting a driver's license, the FAA's test is designed to be extremely difficult for for the average American, requiring people to spend hundreds of dollars on training courses. Speaking from someone who has been training for a commercial UAS license, this is no easy task. Regulations and licensing must be altered in order for the growing UAS industry to flourish. Surprisingly, there is a great difference between commercial and recreational piloting. For the people who might be thinking, wait a minute, I don't want just anybody being able to fly a drone over my house and spy on my kids. They should have to be licensed and actually know what it is that they're doing. For starters, if you are a recreational pilot or simply flying for your own enjoyment, there's virtually no regulations in place whatsoever. This means, for example, that I could walk into Walmart today, purchase a $200 drone, and fly it at any time for my own enjoyment without the FAA's knowledge. Doesn't this seem unfair to those who are trying to make a living but are required to go through the biased, rigorous, and expensive licensing process? Instead of protecting American privacy and safety, the FAA has decided to prioritize its own financial gain over its own citizens and workers. One of the biggest industries that is negatively affected by these regulations is the farming industry. Due to a constantly growing population, food production must grow along with it, creating an essential role for UAS operators. Unfortunately, this industry is being oppressed due to the biased regulations in place. As you can imagine, industries must think of new cost-cutting methods to produce essential goods and products. According to Douglas M. Marshall, the previous division manager for UAS regulations and standard development at the Physical Science Laboratory at New Mexico State University, for the reason of a growing population, many of these food production operations are turning to new techniques known as precision agriculture. Marshall then goes on to explain that precision agriculture is a farming system that utilizes information and technology from unmanned aerial systems to enhance and accelerate the farming production. Why would the federal government make it even more difficult for farmers who are the ones producing the food for American citizens? This is because the FAA knows this is just one more aspect that they will be able to grow their financial power. Through the paid registration and licensing, the FAA is willing to make farmers' jobs even more difficult just to put money in their own pockets. The use of UASs in precision agriculture can be broken down into three ways. The first, and most important, is crop health assessment. In order to limit the number of bad crop yields, UASs can assist in the assessment of crop health by remotely sensing the photosynthetic activity of the plants. This photosynthetic activity is then placed on an index of spectrums, the most common of which is the Normalized Difference Vegetation Index, or NDVI. And while this might seem like a complex system, the NDVI is calculated by comparing the difference between visible and near-infrared light, or NIR. That light is reflected by the plant. What this basically means is that the UASs uses NIR rays in order to measure the amount of sunlight that the plants are taking in and is able to determine their health and what their yield will be for that season. This also tells farmers which fields will be more productive than others and which fields to avert their time and attention towards. This not only helps farmers to make an income, but also allows for more food to be produced in order to cut back on the number of those going hungry every day. Secondly, UASs are utilized for stand counts. Now, through the use of UASs, farmers can know the exact plant per acre that is in their field. This allows farmers to sow a desired number of plants per acre for the maximum yield that the nutrients in the soil will produce. Prematurely knowing what each acre will yield allows farmers to more accurately pre-sell their crops, creating higher profit margins for those without UAS technology. But unfortunately, many farmers are not able to utilize this new skill due to the FAA's regulations in place. Thirdly, UASs are used for crop damage assessment. Due to natural weather, such as heavy rains and droughts, many crops can be lost in large quantities. Through new technologies like UASs, farmers can verify the extent of widespread crop damage so that insurance companies can reimburse the farmers for the proper amount of loss, especially for claims that are filed at 100% loss. As you can clearly see, UAS operations are essential for the farming industry and help to allow farmers achieve better results in a more cost-cutting way. While I only mentioned 3 of these ways that UASs are utilized in agriculture, every year new technologies are being invented to further the use of UASs in agriculture. But due to the FAA's regulations, many farmers are being limited in their ability to produce goods through these means. Unfortunately, due to the majority of farm workers being made up of immigrants, many farmers are suffering from the biased regulations against non-English speaking Americans. According to a 2021 study, immigrant farm workers make up an estimated 73% of agricultural workers in the United States. Because of only 27% of the American farming industry being made up of American-born citizens, most farmers are not able to experience the functionality of precision agricultural just due to the language that they speak. Every year, we see this number continue to increase, meaning that UASs are continually being kept in its infancy. The use of UASs is not only beneficial to farmers, but also to the environment over traditional methods. Through the use of electric motors, UASs allow for man to better take care of and have dominion over God's world, creating cleaner air and less waste, and producing more food in order to combat starvation. We see in Genesis 2:15, the Lord God took man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and to keep it. This shows that man was created to care for and cultivate the ground. The use of UASs allow for us to better protect and take care of God's earth, the very thing that we were placed here to take care of. It is clear that the removal of these regulations would allow for more farms to be able to utilize UASs in their production, which in turn would be beneficial for all of America. In order for precision agriculture to reach its fullest potential, these culturally biased regulations that only affect commercial workers need to be removed. In addition to farming, construction has grown into the second most popular industry for immigrant workers, and one of the most profitable industries for new UAS pilots. But due to the FAA's regulations in place, achieving proper licensing can be extremely difficult for someone who is looking to go into this field. In just the past 10 years, the applicability of UASs in construction have advanced the speed at which jobs can be accomplished, in turn creating new levels of profit for construction companies. Michael Wallach, a teacher of engineering and technology in Kentucky, states that UASs are currently used in construction and agriculture more than any other commercial areas, with over 16 million in annual market opportunities. He then continues and lists different aspects of how drones can be used in construction. Drones can survey property slated for development to assist in planning and surveying. They can be used to determine the amount of material on a job site, or they can be used to inspect new or existing structures to ensure the safety of the workers. The implementation of UASs in construction has the potential to generate millions of high-paying American jobs, as well as grow the economy. Yet, this potential for many Americans will never become a reality due to the bias and unreasonable regulations that are in place today. In order for the construction industry to reach its fullest potential, these regulations that only affect commercial workers must be removed. One of these regulations that keeps construction workers from flying at night, at a time where most construction in America takes place. Part 107, Subpart B of FAR AIM states that no person may operate a small unmanned aircraft system during night. The majority of road and interstate construction takes place at night due to there being less people on the road. With this regulation in place, it does not allow for the use of UASs in these situations, making workers spend more time and resources. By implementing unnecessary regulations on flight, the FAA is able to place more money within their own pockets, money that would otherwise go towards our cities and construction teams. Furthermore, a similar industry that is commonly used in construction is photogrammetry. Photogrammetry allows for construction workers to accurately generate a 3D model of the environment around them, allowing for better planning and quicker construction in unusual terrains. In the construction industry, it is clear that UAS's photogrammetry offers many advantages over the established techniques. UASs can acquire imagery at much lower costs, for example, for equipment, training, maintenance, and operation, as well as higher operational flexibility and higher flexibility in choice regarding the sensors and spatial radiometric resolution, including an option for UAS laser scanning. Compared to terrestrial laser scanning, or TLS, a previously used tripod form of accurate measuring, UAS photogrammetry is more flexible regarding deployment in rough terrains. Through being able to accurately measure any construction site by just pressing a button, construction teams are now easily able to see the task at hand and what type of equipment will be needed for the intended job. The use of UAS photogrammetry has revolutionized the way that construction teams operate, as well as their efficiency on the field, allowing for quicker productions with fewer mistakes along the way. If this is the case, then why is it that these regulations are in place only for those whose work demands it? In order to answer these questions, we must look toward what the Constitution says about the federal government's authority to implement law in order to figure out a better way for the FAA to handle these regulations. We see in Article 1, Section 8, all of the powers that the federal government has the authority to address. And through an interview with constitutional enthusiast and expert Jim Lewis, if there is nothing in Article 1, Section 8 about aviation, then the federal government is not granted the authority to address it. This shows that the founders never intended for the federal government or the FAA to have this much power over citizens' lives, to the point where they can control how they live their lives and how they make their income. American citizens should be able to earn an income through UAS operations without having to go through the rigorous regulatory system in order to create exponentially more jobs, a better economy, and a truly free America. A change must take place that removes these regulations and cuts down on the federal government's power. This is through state nullification, or the state saying, no, we are not going to enforce this law in our state. This means that if the states choose to, they can make the FAA's regulations obsolete. Nullification would allow for American citizens to freely fly for an income without the expensive bias regulations. Sometimes the most unlikely can become the most extraordinary. At least that was the case for an idea that will lead to a change in the way the entire world operates. Due to the FAA's involvement in UAS regulations, the entire industry itself has been kept in its infancy. But it does not have to remain that way. From food production to construction and everything in between, UASs can grow to influence every aspect of American life and will only continue to grow in importance in the coming years if these regulations are removed.